So now that the desk is finished, we need to build a cloud to hang over the desk and the listening area so we can tame some of the acoustics in the room. So here we are, some 1x4. We're going to do a cloud that's 4 feet wide and 5 feet long, which will fit on the flat part of the ceiling above the desk. And then we have the sloped walls coming down, which I may build some panels to put on there later, but I just wanted to show you guys how easy it is to build a cloud. We're just using some basic 1x4s I bought at the big box store, and we're going to fill it with rock wool and cover it with fabric. I've got my radial arm saw, which I love for when cut off like this. You can't see it in the video, but I also have a chop saw on the other side, which works just as well. Or you can just use a skill saw. Either way, this just is laid out for me. If you look down there on the end of the bench, you can see the last 2 drawers for the desk. They're down there, and the paint's drying on them. And I use enamel, so I like to leave them sit for a week, even though they're dry to the touch. I like to let the enamel cure for about a week before I start handling them and installing them. It just makes that finish harder. Sometimes I've found that there's wet spots that, while you don't get any paint on you get fingerprints into the paint. So we're cutting all the pieces, and you can see there by the electrical outlet, there's 4 pieces of 3/4 inch plywood corners that were left over from building the desk. And we're going to use those to strengthen the corners of the frame as we build. So we've got our 4 side pieces cut, and there's those triangles that I'm going to use to keep everything square and add strength. So we'll start drilling some pilot holes and screwing everything together. You can't really see things too well, but I'm laying the triangles on the board just to give me an idea of how long they are, so I can drill a couple pilot holes so I can screw those triangles into the corners. If you don't drill pilot holes, more than likely you're going to split your wood. This isn't the best stuff on the market. But as long as you drill some pilot holes, you won't have any problems. And then I'm going to use deck screws to put everything together. So I told you wrong on the screws that I was using. The screws that I actually ended up using are called cabinet installation screws, and they have almost like a washer integrated into the head of the screw, and they're fairly flat. So they do a really good job of holding things together without digging into the wood and having a chance of splitting it, and give us a lot of strength. So as you can see, if you look over at the right, I've already got the triangular piece of plywood installed. That's 3/4 inch plywood, by the way. And we're doing the other side here. get it screwed in, and then we'll flip it over and do the other two. Here we go, adding the last two triangles. Make everything nice and square and strong. And then what I'll end up doing is putting some hooks into those triangular pieces. And that's how we're going to hang this thing. So try to stay out of the way of the camera here so that you guys can see how pretty simple. You just hold it in and with your one hand and put a few screws in it. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's the beauty of it. All this is going to be covered, so nobody's ever going to really see it. They're just going to see a black piece of fabric hanging up from the ceiling. So it's a great first project if you've never done any woodworking before. And it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward, easy to do. So there's my triangles. And now we're going to flip it up on the sawhorses and staple the fabric to it. So here we are, throwing the sawhorses up and a piece of plywood that the frame can sit on, and we're laying the fabric out. This is a piece of fabric that I've had forever. Bought it from a company called Rose Brand. They sell theatrical fabrics. And you can get this stuff in dozens and dozens and dozens of colors and different weights. This is a fairly lightweight fabric. I've got some heavier stuff, but decided to use the lighter weight simply because it's easier to stretch around. Here we go. And this piece happened to be just the right size to make this cloud. Worked out pretty well. So we'll start at one end and get my electric stapler out and just fold it up the sides and staple it in the top. And that rough edge will be hanging up toward the ceiling, so no one's going to see it. So there again, I don't have to put a hem on it. Don't have to be real precise with it. Just try to stretch it to get all the wrinkles out. So initially I had the frame upside down. I want those corner braces to be up toward the ceiling because I'm going to put eye hooks in those corner braces, and that's how we're going to hang this cloud from the ceiling. So now you can see I'm just starting in, bringing the fabric up and stapling it to the top of that 1x4. Trying to stretch it out to make sure it's tight and square. That's the hardest part, is making sure it's square, especially when I didn't have a full table to set everything on. So putting a few staples in it, just make sure everything looks good. And we'll just, once we get that done, here I am going to the other end, hoping I've got enough fabric. I thought I did, but I was a little nervous. But as you can see, it worked out just perfect with the fabric size. I didn't have to cut anything. I was pretty lucky there. With a scrap piece of fabric that I had just laying around that didn't cost me anything. If you don't want to look at Rose Brand or you want something local, Joanne Fabric carries a pretty good selection of fabrics. Just don't buy something real thin. you don't need to. The sound will go through pretty much anything. Buy a heavier fabric because, let's face it, rock wool's pretty heavy. And even with mine, once we get this thing up in the air, if you look at it, you can see the fabric bowing in the center from the weight of the rock wool. So we're just going to put a few staples in it just to hold everything in place while we work it, and then we'll go back around and add a few more staples and make it secure. So here I am finishing up the last side, and I pulled the fabric pretty tight. One, because I had to in order to get the fabric up over that last edge, but it worked out pretty well because the fabric holds the rock wool in, no problems, and it looks pretty good hanging. You'll see pictures at the end of what it looks like hung up. The hardest part of putting the fabric on was making the corners look good and folding everything in and making a nice diagonal going up. Took me a couple tries to get it just exactly how I wanted it so it looked nice. But it really wasn't, it was a pain, but it wasn't difficult. It was just trying a couple different things to get it to where it looked the way I wanted it to. And so we're just going around finishing the corners up. Here, this corner, you can see a little bit better how I went about doing it, making it look good. That electric stapler made all the difference in the world, but you can do it with a hand stapler. Not quite as convenient, but it works. You don't need the fancy tools to do this. You can do it with basic hand tools and get something usable that looks nice. So don't be scared to make your own. Buying pre-made panels is so darned expensive because basically let's face it, you're paying somebody else to do it. You're paying their labor, their taxes, their insurance, everything that is involved in that. I'm cheap. I'm a do-it-yourselfer. I'm gonna make sure that I get the most bang for my buck. So there's our our cloud with the fabric on. So now I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to hang it and what eye hooks I'm going to use. I've got some cables that came from some lights that have a adjustment mechanism to them that I decided to use. But I was trying to decide how far from the ceiling I wanted to hang this and if I needed to use those cables. From everything I've researched, if I take a 4-inch panel, hang it 4 inches from the ceiling, I effectively have an 8-inch panel without having to use all that extra rock wool. Where if I mounted this panel tight to the ceiling, it would only be a 4-inch panel. So I decided I want to hang it down, but I've got some other types of hooks, and I was thinking about doing a hard connection from an eye hook to an open hook that was put into the ceiling. But I started thinking about it, and I don't know where the studs are, trusses in the ceiling, and I doubt it's going to work out that they're going to be exactly at each corner of the cloud. So I decided to go with the cables so that I could kind of adjust it and keep it down that 4 inches and didn't have to worry about the alignment from the eye hooks that I'm putting in the cloud up to the hooks that are going to be in the ceiling. So here we are, getting ready here. We're going to put some eye hooks in those 4 corners. And because nothing's critical and I don't have to line up with everything, I really don't even have to measure. I can just kind of eyeball these hooks in each corner, and we'll be ready to take it upstairs and start working on that portion. So here we are screwing those eye hooks in, and we're going to put one in each corner. Just drill a small pilot hole. Here you can see this corner pretty well. Small pilot hole, and start the hook in. And then throw a screwdriver through it and just screw it down in. And just do all 4 corners that way. Here you can see the cables. I was thinking about doing one cable on each end and looping it up that way. And I changed my mind and decided to do a separate hook for each corner because I wanted the cloud, I wanted to be able to level the cloud with the cables, and I didn't know exactly how everything was going to lay out. So I cut the cables short. I could use one cable. So here's the ceiling in the studio. And the cloud is designed to hang between those 2 sets of lights. The one that's over the monitor and the desk, all the way back to behind the desk. The biggest problem I had was trying to find the joists in the ceiling. It was my stud finder didn't really want to find them too well. So I had to poke around and drill a few holes and play with it. I really thought there would be a solid piece of wood right where that the seam where the flat ceiling and the slope ceiling connect, and I was going to just put the hooks there. But it didn't work out that way. They didn't build it that way. The trusses go the other way. So I'm up there on a rough ceiling trying to get my stud finder to find the studs. And once I found them, there again, drill a pilot hole, and you'll see the hook here in just a second. So I'm measuring from the wall out to determine where the one on the other side is going to be, so I don't have to use the stud finder. And my camera died, so I'm going to take a few pictures to show you how I ended up hanging it. It's just basically a hook in each corner, and then I used the cables and looped them up over it. I did not fill the cloud with rock wool until I got it upstairs, because it was just me and it was going to be a little heavy and unwieldy. So I brought the cloud up, hung it from the front two hooks over the desk. Then I filled it with rock wool and then lifted it up and hung it in place. And then using the adjustments that I told you about on the cables, I was able to adjust it and get it straight. So take a look at the pictures and it should be pretty clear how it all went together.